Tatkanashaya vidmahe vakratundaya dhimahi tano danti prachodayate Om Tat Parampayaya Vidmahe Jnanalingeshwaraya Dhimahi Tano Guru Prachodayate Om Yoga Maharishi Dr. Swami Geetananda Giri Guru Maharaj Ki Jai. Beautiful words in the mantras we've just chanted. Dhimahi, I meditate upon thee. Dhimahi. D, here's the sound D. D associated with light. Not our ordinary light, but that divine light that all the mystics, all the avatars, all the messiahs, all the great religious teachers talk about. The beautiful inner light where suddenly we see, whereas before everything was darkness. Dhimahi. This light comes to us when we have the capacity to meditate. Prachodayat. Please stimulate me. We invoke energies which will stimulate us to manifest those same energies in our life. We meditate upon the Guru, that the Guru Spirit may stimulate us, that we may manifest the Guru Spirit. We meditate upon the form of Ganesh, Ganapati, that Ganesha will stimulate us, that we can manifest his qualities. Actually, one way we can look at some of these deities as they are yantras. They are actually yantras which are fleshed out. A yantra is a blueprint of manifestation. So, we can use Ganapati as an example, Ganesh, Vigneshwara, Vinayaka, so many names are there for this wonderful, wonderful elephant-headed god. With so many stories and so much symbology associated with him. Such a benevolent, cheerful. I suppose this laughing Buddha of the Chinese tradition is Ganesh is about as close as we come to the laughing Buddha. Just a beautiful, beautiful energy which is cheerful, strong, at the top of the food chain, has no natural enemies, balanced, stable, powerful, able to push through all difficulties. Associated with Muladhara Chakra, the square, the number 4, which is also the symbol of stability. If we want a stability in the material world, we have to have a square. A square is one of the most stable shapes. A triangle can have stability, but it can also not have total stability. But a square is a very, very stable shape. So stability is associated with Ganapati. In this wonderful mantra, we invoke all these things. Stimulate us. We meditate upon these things. We concentrate upon these things, that we too may manifest this. As we think, so we become. Positive mind management, Dharana, it's all the same idea. Instead of allowing stupid thoughts to dominate our mind, stupid ideas, stupid feelings, low, base emotions, we lift our consciousness and we concentrate on some of these wonderful, wonderful thoughts that are contained within the mantras. This is why mantra, when used properly, is the ultimate of positive mind management. I was thinking the other day, what higher thought could I have than the thought of Aum? And I couldn't think of any higher thought. That this is the ultimate perfect thought, Aum. Or something like Shanti, or Ambe Sivan. or Namah Shivaya, or Jai Ram Shri Ram. I can't think of any thought which is more noble, more beautiful, closer to God than that. So like that, these mantras are an essential part of dharana. Positive mind management is part and parcel of dharana. If we are victims of negative thinking, if we're always running around blaming other people and complaining and whining and indulging in self-pity, bemoaning our fate with downcast eyes, well, we're going to be very poor candidates for dharana. And these mantras are wonderful, wonderful tools of dharana. This is just a little bit of an aside, but every single image, basic image, and I'm not talking about some of the creative images that have sprung up in recent times where artists have taken liberties with some of our ancient symbols and they have distorted the reality behind the symbol. I'm talking about the basic symbols. If we take something like Ganapati and you meditate upon the basic shape of Ganapati, actually, I'm taking this very much from dance, because in dance we create these images with hands. And I think the mudras of dance are very, very close to the essential yantric shape of the deity. For example, with Ganapati in dance, this is one of the mudras we use for Ganapati. Now this, of course, in the physical world, represents the trunk, the lifted trunk of the elephant. And in Hinduism, it's considered very auspicious to go to a temple and you lift the trunk, you go and there's a temple elephant and he lifts his trunk and goes whack on top of your head. And this is considered to be a blessing. It's quite a nice experience. I've had my head whacked many, many times by elephant trunks. And it's very nice. It's really very, very pleasant. It's quite a nice thing. This mudra in dance indicates that, but actually, this is like the movement of Shakti up and down the Shushum Nadi. So in an esoteric way, this Ganapati is showing the movement of Shakti or the Kundalini from Muladhara right up to the Sahasrara. This is the esoteric idea. And another way we show Ganapati in dance is to show like this, to show his big ears and how the ears are always moving. And I take this also to mean to symbolize the chakras of the upper area of the head. The Sahasrara, the chakra that is normally thought to be one chakra, is actually 6 chakras. The 6 coronal chakras that are just like about like this. This is why we use this Anjali mudra to sort of indicate or to stimulate this whole coronal plexus chakric area. And when we do like this in dance and we show the ears, it's another way that this whole beautiful energy field around our head is stimulated. And the Ganapati, as a symbol, gives these ideas. It gives these insights into psychic things, that is the inner reality behind the outer manifestation. And some of our dance mudras are really wonderful that way. This is why I love the Bharatanatyam so much, because it's one of the most subtle ways to tune into the inner symbolism of our iconography. Shiva with his lifted foot, his hands up, this Abhaya mudra. Why in the world is this mudra universally accepted as, don't worry, watch it, don't worry, everything is okay? How many times have you used that? How many times have people used it to you? Don't worry about things, it's okay. Even the policemen stop, you know. This is a universal gesture. Stop. Stop what? Stop worrying. Stop getting agitated. Be quiet. Be quiet. And of course, this is a mudra common to all of our gods. Why? Why is this there like that? Because this is a mudra of shunya. That means stop it. It's nirodha. Stop. Stop the agitation. Stop the fear. Stop the stupidity. That the hand, when the hand is flat, the prana has to stop. This is a gesture of stoppage, cessation. So some of these mudras in the dance and also in the iconography of Hinduism, if you see some of the statues, the old ones in our temple, and see how these statues are constructed and the way they hold their hands, the way they hold their feet, and how the different manifestations will hold their hands in a different way, hold their feet in a different way. They'll be holding different instruments. All this has terrific psychic meaning. But one has to be initiated into all this, and very few people know anything about it. And I'm certainly not an expert on it. I've just had some tastes of it, and I found it very thrilling and very uplifting and inspiring to have insights into cosmic reality in this very, very beautiful abstract way. So these are some elements of dharana also that are available to us in Hinduism and in yoga. We have all these beautiful symbols that we can focus on, that we can concentrate on, that we can delve deeply into, because these symbols are like windows into universal truths. They're like doors through which we can pass to experience these universal truths. And not many cultures have symbols like that. And I've studied many cultures, but there are some. You will find some symbols in different cultures. We find the lingam in many, many cultures. They don't call it a lingam, but they'll call it the stone, the sacred stone, the sacred pillar, the sacred post. In North America, the North American Indians have something called the totem pole, which is just a big post, which has carvings on it, and they worship it, the totem pole. It's a lingam. It's like a lingam, a post, a pole. So in one's own culture, one can go back into, especially the culture of the land, not the alien culture. Like, for example, in Australia, you'd have to go back into the Aboriginal culture. And in New Zealand, you'd have to go back into the Maori culture. And in America, they'd have to go back to the American Indian culture. And then in Europe, of course, there's still some old traces of some of the old cultures there that will have a lot of symbols that may access eternal realities. And these are symbols that you can keep in your house, and these are symbols you can keep around you to remind you to find these symbols and make them part of your life. We're very fortunate in India that we can be surrounded by symbols like this, which focus our mind. We see the temple towers, and the temple tower is a symbol of evolution process, the symbol of the evolutionary process. How from this very broad base, the beings go, and they become more and more refined as they rise up until finally they come to the top. Now you may wonder why our temples are not pyramids. They don't peak. They come up and then they're flat on the top. Now this is because if you would draw an imaginary line up to a point and back again, you'd have a perfect psychic triangle at the top of every temple. And this is to indicate the abstract nature of the higher reaches of consciousness. That the higher reaches of consciousness cannot be shown in a manifest symbol. And every town, every city, every village will have, some very small villages have the most magnificent temples in India. I've been in villages of only 200 people that have had the most incredible, mind-blowing temples. So we're very fortunate in South India. North India, it's not true. In South India, we have all these symbols around us that remind us of higher realities, and they are symbols that draw the mind into higher thought. This is all part of Dharana. Now, if you live in a culture where those symbols are not available to you, and all you see is Mickey Mouse and Budweiser ads and naked women with their, hanging out on the billboards, and neon signs that say drink Coca-Cola. And, if you're surrounded by that type of symbols of stupid consumerism, well, you have to be careful because the mind gets flooded with those images and we don't even know it. It's quite frightening to think that young kids are exposed to television from infanthood and they're watching all these commercials. I mean, what kind of mindsets are they going to have? This consumerist culture, the symbols of this consumerist culture, just drag the consciousness down to the lowest level. So these are things to think about when you construct your life. This is why it's good to live out in a small place, out in the country, or if you have to live in a city, try to live in a suburb, out on the outskirts. Some of the European cities are quite well laid out that you can live out in the outskirts. Some of our students, for example, in Berlin, tell me that in 5 minutes they can walk from their flat to a forest, which is just marvelous. So if you can find cities like that, if you have to live in a city, to find a city where you can within a short time walk out into a natural place. Because nature is filled with these beautiful symbols. Yesterday, seeing the wonderful full moon, there's a beautiful bindu. The moon is a bindu, isn't it? It's a fabulous bindu. When we talk about bindu dharana and concentrating on bindu, keeping the mind focused on a bindu, there's your most perfect bindu is the full moon in a beautiful sky. Or the beautiful rising sun. Sometimes the sun rises as a beautiful bindu shape, beautiful red bindu. As red and as beautiful as any bindu that a Hindu woman puts on her forehead. We find these wonderful, behind natural forms lies the great reality also. Trees, different types of trees. We went to a temple a couple of weeks ago where they had the most beautiful banyan trees. It was just the most marvelous symbol of a universal reality to see these wonderful banyan trees and to be surrounded by all the branches, the roots, literally the roots going into the ground. Or to look up in the sky in the morning hot yoga class and see the clouds. What a wonderful symbol of the Maya of materialism, of the Maya of the sensate existence. Just when you're doing Ustra Asana, you look up and then you come down again and you go up again and the sky is totally changed. Just in the time it took to do one Ustra Asana, you've got a different scenario up in the sky. So nature is filled with all these wonderful, wonderful manifestations that behind them lies the reality. And contemplating them can take us into that reality. Now, dharana is often defined as concentration, but I think it would be preferable to call it contemplation. Contemplation implies to think about something deeply. Not just think about it, you give it a thought and then you go on to the next thought. But to stay on a particular thought and think deeply about it. This is what is implied in the English word contemplation. Now there's another Sanskrit word often used for contemplation, which they say manasa in Vedanta. Vedanta doesn't use the yogic terms, like it doesn't use dharana much, or dhyan so much. It uses more manasa and nididhyanasana for these concepts. But I think that dharana is perhaps a little more better defined as contemplation, a type of concentrated contemplation perhaps. And I think that we've talked quite a bit about this subject, and I've tried to also show you that there is a systematic dharana. We've tried to present you with many of these systematic ideas here, and perhaps we haven't been able to go into them as deeply as we could or we would, but I don't know if you'd be able to tolerate it at this point anyway. And so there's not too much use of doing it, even if we had the time and everything. There is this whole system, we're trying to initiate you into it, this whole system of mandala dharana, mandala pranayama, the mantra laya, the bijas associated with the chakras, the dara bijas associated with every chakra. We haven't talked too much about the Bindu Dharana. There's a whole concept of Bindu Dharana. There are certain places in the brain which we use for concentration, fixing the mind, anchoring the mind. Of course, we've talked to some extent about the Bindu between the brows, the Bhumadhya Bindu, right between the brows. We've talked a little bit about Nisarga Bindu. These are perhaps the two most common places in the body that are used as sites of concentration, or anchorages of consciousness, as some people call it, which is a very nice phrase, to anchor the consciousness here. And when you're chanting mantras, or you are working with your breath awareness, this moving of the breath out and in, this is a very wonderful place to focus the mind. Or when you're doing pranayama, to focus right on the tip of the nose or slightly in front of the nose is a very good place to fix the mind when you're doing pranayama. And just to try to feel the prana being drawn into the body, and not just into the body, but into the whole pranamaya kosh. And the point of concentration is here, that you're just drawing that prana into the whole pranic system, that all the prana nadis are getting stimulated. And that insight can come best when you focus your attention right at the tip of the nose, the Nisarga Bindu. So these are the two main areas of the body where the consciousness can be anchored in dharana practices. There are other areas. There's the area right here in the mid-brow, and then there's another place right on the top of the head, which also you may be using when you visualize with your Loma Viloma, Anuloma Viloma, Aluloma Viloma. You may be feeling that when you bring the energy up to the top of the head and then let it come down to the bottom of the spine. So this area is also an important point of concentration in the Loma Viloma Kriyas, the top of the head and the base of the spine, and trying to bring a connection between the two. And these are also important points of concentration. These are common to all serious yogic systems. These ideas of focusing the mind on important parts of the body is common to all yogic systems, not just the Parampariya. And the top of the head, or slightly above the head, some systems say slightly above or slightly below the anal area. That is, to try to visualize the pranic body. But one can also concentrate on the top of the head or at the base of the spine in the mula. That is the mula bindu at the base of the spine, and the top of the head is the trikuti bindu. It's called trikuti because it's like a pyramid. It's a triangle shape. So these perhaps, and then of course the other areas of concentration, throat, the Jalandhara area, the bindu, the nabi bindu at the navel. So these are the major concentration points in the body where the consciousness can be anchored. When we're doing the Bandha Trayam, we're anchoring our consciousness at throat, at navel, and at the base of the spine. So all these ideas are encompassed in the practices which you've been learning. They're encompassed as part of your Bandha Trayam, and especially in the Loma Viloma group of concentration exercises, which are very, very, very important. Loma Viloma, Aluloma Viloma, Anuloma Viloma, these are extremely important concentration exercises. And these are like exercises that can help you perceive or realize the reality of energy flows in the body. There is a reality of the pranic flow. The Shushum Nadi, Ida, and Pingala Nadi are realities. They have been talked about by tens of thousands of rishis, have experienced these. And this idea of the prana moving up and down, we find in all the Hatha Yoga tantric literature. This is not just something that is coming to us from somebody's creative imagination. This is actually a fact, according to the yogis, that there is this beautiful energy moving up and down all the time with every breath. In some of the scriptures, they have very beautiful descriptions of this, that the jiva moves up and down with every breath. In breath up, out breath down, in breath up, out breath down. And then it is said that the 21,600 times per day, the jiva is moving up and down. This is a number of breaths we're taking in a day. 16 or 17 times a minute. You multiply that by, you'll find you get to the number about 21,600. And let's move it up and down. And eventually, according to our tantric yogic ideas, we have to stop this movement, and we have to instead move that energy in one way, straight up from base of the spine right out the top of the head. Well, I don't think we have to worry too much about things like that, but it's very fascinating to think about these things. And as you progress and as you grow and as your minds mature, as your spirit matures, these things will start to become very real to you. But you have to go slowly, otherwise you can start to fantasize. And I can't tell you often enough that the greatest enemy to spiritual life, especially when we come into the more abstract phases, is fantasy. That's why you've always got to keep checks on yourself and be around people who will check you. Be around people who will say, hey, come on, what are you doing? What are you saying? You need people like that around you, so that you have to look at yourself, so that you don't go flying off into silly things. I've had so many people come and say, I want to read your aura, and I'd say, no thank you. Or I want to read your palms, I say, no thank you. There's so many of these type of people. Or I see your aura, it's so this color, it's that color, it's this and that. I say, please, I'm not interested in all that stuff. I'm not interested in it. Don't you want me to clean your chakras? No thank you. Chakra sweepers. Don't you want me to fix the leak in your pranamaya kosh? No, thank you. As though it's a flat tire, that's a punctured tire that's got to have a patch on it. Stay away from people like that. There will be a few genuine ones, no doubt. There may be people who have these things, but in my experience, if you have it, you don't talk about it and you don't show it. These are not things to be talked about. These are not things to be shown. If it's there, you keep it secret. This is my experience. Those who don't have it and who fantasize about it, they're the ones that are advertising themselves all over the place as the world's greatest pranic healer and the world's greatest repairer of holes in the chakras and holes, cleaner of chakras, and come to my shop and you get a chakric rehaul for, the wheels. It's like going to an auto repair shop. Come on in and we'll retune your chakras for $100 or whatever they charge. So don't fall into those traps. These are traps along the way. And they're a lot of fun. It's a nice game if you want to stop for a while and play a few games here and there. Just realize what you're doing. You're losing energy, losing time, going off track. Let things be natural, go into things. The mind matures, the spirit matures, the realization matures, slowly, carefully, and wisely also. Wisely. So these are some ideas about dharana. Now, dharana can be an act of will. The first 6 limbs of Ashtanga Yoga can be willed. We can will ourselves to follow yama niyama. We can make an effort. We can will ourselves to perform asana. We can will ourselves to do pranayama. To some extent, we can will pratyahara. We can restrain. We can control the tongue. We can control our desire for sensual comforts. So to some extent, pratyahara can be willed. Dharana can be willed. We can will our mind to stay in one place. We can sit down and say, I'm going to practice Loma Viloma now. I'm going to sit down and practice Hangsa Kriya. Hangsa Kriya is another extremely important Kriya because it's so close to reality. It can take us right into very, very high states of realization. Hangsa. This is, of course, the mantra of the breath. It is said in the scriptures, and it's a reality, that every time we breathe, we are chanting a mantra. And the mantra we are chanting is Hangsa Soham. Hamsa Soham. Soham, I am God. Hangsa, that I am. Aham Sa. Aham Sa, I am Sa. Sa is God. Sa is also the sound of the in-breath. Aham is the sound of the out-breath, the ego. Isn't that interesting? It's very, very interesting. That our rishis said that this is the actual sound of the breath, the psychic sound of the breath, and also even to some extent the physical sound. If you've ever heard the sound of breath, which is amplified, especially I'm thinking now of sounds I've heard, like when, for some reason, being exposed to an operating theater where the breath is being monitored. Somehow it's amplified, that incredible, beautiful, mystic sound of the breath when it is amplified and slowed. Is an amazing sound. And if you listen closely to your own sound, you will find that you are chanting Sa on the in-breath and Aham on the out-breath. And this is the sound of the breath. The breath is a mantra. This is why in the Tantric scriptures they say that every day we are chanting the Ajapa mantra 21,600 times. The Ajapa mantra is Soham Hamsa. I am God, God is I. I am God, God is I. Every single time we take a breath, we're chanting that mantra. And the Hangsa Kriya is an attempt to enter into the realization of that sound, that beautiful mystic sound of the breath. It's a wonderful Kriya, and it's another wonderful, wonderful part of the Dharana system that is available to us in such a beautiful way in this Paramparya. If you study the Tantric or the Hatha Yoga scriptures, you won't find the instructions for these things, but you will find the concepts. And I didn't know that because when Swamiji was alive, I never studied any of these scriptures because I didn't have to. If I had any question, I would just ask Swamiji and he'd give me the answer. But once he left his body, I didn't have anyone to ask for my questions. And I developed an interest in some of these scriptures, the Gita, the Yoga Sutras, the Upanishads, the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, some of the Tantric literature. And I was just astounded to find everything that Swamiji was teaching us in such simple, clear, practical, organized, rational way was the teaching of all these scriptures. But these scriptures do not teach it. They simply give the concept. They don't teach how to enter into that knowledge or how to access that. They simply describe the concept. That was the first time I realized that I realized these things because Swamiji taught us so beautifully and so in such practical, down-to-earth way that these profound, ancient ideas. And I think if you take up any of the study of the scriptures, you'll be astounded to find what we're teaching you is there, but it's not like contemplation of the pranava aum is advocated in so many of the Upanishads, but they don't tell how to do it. The technique is not there. But the idea is there. So, there is a system of dharana being taught you, and it's been taught you from the beginning in very light doses, so that by the time you come to the 6 months, you're able to withstand some of the more serious things to some extent at least. And my point is just to make you aware of the fact that when you were talking about dharma, that you have a beautiful system of dharma available to you if you want to practice it. It's a very beautiful, complete system of dharma which is anchored in cosmic realities. You don't have to go any other place. You don't have to go chase any other meditation master or go to Vipassana or run off and follow this Tibetan Buddhist or this Korean monk or whatever the flavor of the day is. That everything you need is there. Now you've got to access it. It's in your computer. You've been programmed. Now you just have to simply activate the program, that's all. Now this is all dharana. Up to 6 steps we can will. When we come to the 7th step, dhyana, now we're getting into different territory. We cannot will dhyana. We cannot will dhyana. This is why when people say, I meditate, they're actually lying. They're telling a big fat fib. It is not possible for the I to meditate, in the true sense of the word, in the essence of the word. Now, of course, the word meditate has been corrupted to mean so many things. But if we're going to use meditate as a synonym for dhyana, we cannot say, I meditate. And I think it's very important to clarify our terms. This was one of the teachings of Confucius, which is wonderful. He said we must clarify our terms. It's one of the big teachings, one of the major essentials of Confucian thought, that we must use the proper terminology. We must realize the essence of a term before we use it, and not change that essence to mean what we want it to mean. There's a beautiful statement in Alice in Wonderland where Lewis Carroll, I think it's the Mad Hatter, tells Alice, when I use a word, it means exactly what I choose it to mean, and nothing else. How many people do you know like that? When I use a word, it means exactly what I choose it to mean. Because Alice is complaining that he's using all kinds of words in a very strange way. So he gets very angry and annoyed with her. And that's the modern world. We're using the word meditate as though it's just some flippant little thing. But if we want to if we want to use it as a synonym for dhyana, then we cannot say, I meditate. Because there is no I to meditate. Now let us discuss this a little bit. Or now I would like to discuss a little bit dhyana. I've tried to explore the idea of dharana for you. And now I would like to discuss this idea of dhyana a little bit. We can say that dharana is knocking at the door. Okay? You come to a door, it's closed, right? You want to go in, you think something's inside there. Okay? You knock. And if the door doesn't open, you keep knocking, don't you? And if it doesn't open, you keep knock. And it still doesn't open, you just keep going knock. And you're going to really annoy who's ever inside there. And so pretty soon, the person who's inside is going to get so annoyed that your persistence, knock. I know you're in there. Knock. Unlock the door. Knock. Come on, you. Knock. Okay. Dharana is knocking at the door. Dhyana is when the door is open. Okay? Now that's not in our control, is it? We can knock and knock forever. But we can't make the door open. Dhyana is when the door opens. And samadhi is when you walk inside. There are a lot of people, the door opens, and they get so shocked, they fall down dead. They've been knocking so long that when the door opens, they get a heart attack and they die. So don't make that mistake, okay? Or they're so stupid that, the door opens and they say, "Oh, excuse me, I came to the wrong place." I've been knocking at the wrong door. We have to think about these things. They happen all the time. So I like that analogy. This was one that just occurred to me a few days ago, actually. I never thought about it before, but my mind has been contemplating the idea of Dharana-Dhyana-Samadhi, and I really feel that is very, very true to the real situation. That Dharana, we knock, and we can knock. We have the right to knock, we have the will to knock, we are able to knock, but we cannot open the door. Now you can say, if we don't open, who opens? That's what we're trying to find out. We're only going to know that when we get inside. We're not going to know who opens the door till we walk through that door, are we? We're not going to know that answer to that. Something opens. And we call that, what? Grace. Good karma. Punya. Maturity of spirit. Something happens. And the door opens. Then we have to be alert enough to know that the door is open. We have to be alert enough to walk inside. But we can't open the door. Now this is the classical idea. This is the Patanjali's idea of dharana, of dhyana. When dharana becomes so intensified that the person who is concentrating, the object upon, or the idea upon which she's concentrating, and the active concentration, the three parts of the process suddenly merge into one flow. It becomes a flow. Dhyan is a flow. Another definition for dhyan, which I like very much, is mystic absorption. I like that definition very much. Mystic absorption. The dhyan is like being absorbed. When we are engaged in dharana, we're pushing. We may even be pushing against the door. We're pushing. But in dhyan, we're getting pulled. We just get pulled in. We just get pulled into that thing. Absorption. Absorption means that suddenly we're just absorbed. Mystic absorption. We are absorbed into this mystic state. Now, if we can exist in that mystic absorption long enough, then it is said that we enter into that samadhi. Sama, adi. Sama, the same. Adi, the highest. We become the same as the highest. In other words, we become God. Soham, I am He. Aham. Aham Brahmasmi. These great Mahavakyas of the Upanishadic literature, the great sayings. I am Brahman. Shivoham, 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 Soham. I am Shiva. This is samadhi. When we actually are one with that highest principle. Whether we call it Shiva, Brahman, Jesus, Allah, cosmic consciousness, the great person, it doesn't really matter. That great personage which is the cause of everything. We become that. We can't imagine it, can we? The mind cannot imagine it. It is beyond mind. We can't even imagine. But we have little tastes of it sometimes. If you ever think of a time when you totally lost yourself, or a time when you were just as high as a kite, and just for no reason, or maybe there was a small reason, like you just saw the most fabulous flower, and just for a second it was just wow. I have that a lot with the kids, Divya and Anna and Raj. It's just wow, everything's gone. Sometimes one feels that when you experience a very nice artistic experience, or read a nice piece of poetry, or see a beautiful natural phenomena, sometimes just in consciousness one feels this, just a beautiful sense of wonder, awe, joy, elation. We know that these are feelings that are very close to the samadhic state, because the rishis say samadhi is sat chit ananda. Sat, eternal reality, unchanging reality, sat. Chit, consciousness. Ananda, the greatest bliss. There's also one scripture, the Indian scriptures are so hilarious because our rishis used to love to calculate everything. And they come up with some of those amazing calculations. There's one scripture, and I can't quote it perfectly, but it's something like to try to inculcate the idea of what anandam can mean. The rishi says, just imagine or remember the happiest moment of your life. The happiest moment you ever had in your life. You just remember that. I can remember several of those. I've had some very, very wonderful high moments in my life that had nothing to do much with the outer world. Maybe they were triggered off by something, but I've been very fortunate. I've had a lot of those in my life. And I can remember those. And the rishis have this elaborate calculation, but I'll shorten it to say that if you remember that and you multiply that feeling by 10 billion times, that is anandam. Isn't that nice? Isn't that better than thinking, suffer, die, and if you're not good, you're going to spend the rest of your life burning for eternity? Isn't that terrible? Isn't that terrible? Don't tell your mother this. Isn't it a terrible idea? It's just horrifying that you can think that any soul can be condemned to be burned forever in hell. What? I mean, it's just terrible. It's terrible. People don't think about it. They just, if you think about it, you can't accept it, of course, but the people don't think about it. When I was a kid, about Divya's age, my grandmother was a liberated lady. She was quite a remarkable woman. And she had, I don't know how many husbands she had. Now see, this is 50 years ago. She must have had at least 4 or 5, and then she had a lot of boyfriends also. And, but she was divorced, and of course she didn't go to church, and she was, she wasn't even an atheist, she just sort of lived her life. And I went to a convent school. And because my mother was a Roman Catholic and was quite a staunch Roman Catholic. And the nuns used to tell me, your grandmother is going to go to hell. And my grandmother was the most important person in my universe when I was a young kid. And they'd say, your grandmother is living in adultery, and she has been divorced, and she is going to go to hell. Now, isn't that a great thing to tell Divya Priya? Somebody like Divya Priya. Of course, you couldn't tell Divya Priya because she hasn't got a clue in hell what hell is. She hasn't got the slightest idea what hell is. But man, we knew all about hell when we were 4 years old. The nuns made sure that we knew about hell. You know, we really had a real good idea of what hell was. You're going to go to hell if you don't come to church every Sunday. And your grandmother's going to go to hell. Isn't that terrible? But the nuns, they sweet little nuns that are praying to sweet Jesus every day, and they can have these most horrible ideas. See, we don't have that at all in Hinduism. There's no such thing as permanent condemnation. Nobody is condemned in the yogic Hindu idea. Every soul will eventually reach moksha. So don't worry about it, everybody. You're going to get it one lifetime or another. And if you don't get it this lifetime, you might get it next, or you might get it in 10,000 lifetimes. And who cares? Who really cares? I used to care about it. I used to tell Swamiji, man, I want moksha right now, and look, I've been with you 3 years and I still don't have samadhi, and what kind of a guru are you? And I should have samadhi after 3 years, and what's wrong? And see how long I can stand on my head, and how long I can hold my breath. And Swamiji used to say, don't get impatient. He said, once you get samadhi, it's not going to matter at all how long it took you to get it. It's not going to matter at all how long it's like you have a bad dream, don't you? And you wake up. That bad dream, it doesn't matter at all you had a bad dream, doesn't it? It's gone. It's gone. And samadhi is waking up. Not necessarily from a bad dream, but from a dream. The rishis define our life, our human life, as a long, long dream. It's a wonderful definition. The human existence is a long, long dream, and samadhi is waking up from that dream. Doesn't matter how long the dream was once you wake up, does it? Doesn't matter what kind of a dream you had once you wake up. You're awake. So it doesn't matter how long it takes us. We don't have to get all hot and bothered about it if we've, done 40 years of sadhana and we're still not enlightened. The other key point there is that we should create a type of consciousness that at the moment of death we exit the body fully conscious. And because that is the time when we can go into samadhi also. Death is the opportunity to enter totally into that samadhic mokshic state if our consciousness is ready for it. And even if we don't enter into samadhi at the moment of death will determine what kind of a body we have next time and what kind of circumstances. This is why it's very, very important to live in such a way that when that moment of death comes, we're fully conscious. And we leave the body consciously in a very high mental state. Very few people do that, especially nowadays. And Helen knows that very well, that the medical fraternity is just determined that nobody should leave the body consciously.
That's so good business.
Such a good business. Isn't it? It's really very, very sad, actually.
People ask as well, they say, can I have as much pain relief as possible so
Yes,
I don't feel
yeah.
anything?
Right,
And
yeah.
then you give them so much that they are completely unconscious.
Yeah, people want that, don't they? They want to sleep. And we can't blame people at that level. This is not to throw blame on people. It's just to see things as they are. Just to see them as they are and then choose what we want. To make our choices consciously. So we should not be afraid of death, because death may be our entrance into samadhi if we've lived properly. That's why it's important to have a mind that's controlled, to have a body that's controlled, to live well. We can't take anything with us when we die, but we can take good thoughts. We can take our virtues. All the virtues that we've accumulated in this lifetime, we can take with us to the next life. So it's worth cultivating them. These are things we can take with us. our virtues, good thoughts, a mind that's controlled, high thoughts. So these are some ideas about Dhyan. Sometimes in some of the scriptures, I'm thinking right now particularly of the Tulsi Ramayana, called the Manasa Charitra. It's a beautiful, beautiful scripture. It's written in Hindi. It's the Ramayana in Hindi. Now I don't know Hindi, but I do have an excellent, just a mind-blowing translation of that, which it's just so incredibly poetic and so beautiful. I just cannot believe anybody wrote it. It's I don't know, the person who's translated this Hindi himself must be a very enlightened person, because the translation is so beautiful. And in that Ramayana, that Hindi Ramayana, we have many Ramayanas in different languages. We have a very famous Ramayana in South India, in Tamil, written by Kambam. It's called the Kambam Ramayana. And then the original Ramayana was written by Valmiki in Sanskrit. And then we have this Tulsidas, the Manasa Charitram, written by Tulsidas, which was written in about the 12th or 13th century in Hindi. But in that, there's a very, very beautiful, I'll see if I can get it out if I have time, there's a very beautiful metaphor of the spiritual life and how things build up. He starts with the milking of a cow as doing good deeds and having good thoughts, and then he builds it up through the churning of butter and how the butter is churned into ghee and how the ghee is used to light a lamp and how that lamp dispels darkness. And he uses this as an extended metaphor for the process of the soul, which is refining itself to the state of Dharana-Dhyana-Samadhi. And it's a marvelous, marvelous metaphor for the meditative process. There's several of these things that I would like to clarify mentally in my own mind. This is one of them, and also this concept of Tirumular's on the relationship between Om and the Bija sounds of the chakras. Some of these are just mind-blowing ideas in these scriptures, which I've not studied deeply enough to clarify it fully, to present it to you, but I know these ideas are there. And in the Tulsi Ramayana, it's called Tulsi because the saint's name was Tulsidas, who wrote it. There's this beautiful metaphor. And another metaphor he uses is that the idea of pouring oil from, you have a can of oil, if any of you have ever had a can of oil, and you want to put that oil from this can into that can, then you have to lift it up and you start to pour it. And he describes dhyan as that pouring of the oil. That is, once the oil starts to pour, it's a continuous process. That the oil, pouring oil from one container to another, is often used. I think it's used in other scriptures also, but the one I remember most vividly is from the Tulsi Ramayana, where the oil is poured into another container, and dhyan is that continuous flow of oil from one container to another. It's a very nice way to think about it, because dhyan implies a continuity, a flow, whereas dharana still implies something that is being pushed with breaks in it. That the dharana still has breaks. You keep your mind in you keep it confined for a while, and then all of a sudden the mind goes off that thing, and you have to bring it back again. And you try to keep the mind confined again, and all of a sudden it goes off, and you bring it back again. And you're just trying to keep that mind, but it keeps, getting away from you. But you're making the effort to contain that mind stuff, that consciousness. But in dhyan, that break is not there. It just becomes continuous flow. Now, if that continuous flow can sustain itself long enough, then it is said that becomes samadhi. And this is why Patanjali also teaches that Dharana-Dhyana-Samadhi are one continuous process, which he calls Samyama Yoga. And this he deals with from chapter 3rd in chapter 3 and 4, the Samyama. Patanjali analyzes Samadhi very thoroughly, and it's quite complex, his analysis, because he puts Samadhi into several levels. There are different levels of Samadhi. And I suppose, at first I used to think that Samadhi was a state that once you attain that, that was it. But apparently, according to Patanjali, you can go into Samadhi and come out of it, that there are lower types of Samadhis and higher types of Samadhi, and then there's the ultimate state where there's no coming back. It's worth studying these, but the Yoga Sutras can be very obtruse. And I have found for my own self that for me it's worked better that every once in a while when I have a question, I pick up the sutras and I have several translations which I compare with each other to try to get the meaning, to get different ideas on the meanings of the words. And whenever I have a question in sadhana, I pick up the sutras and then I try to find out some answer from a particular part of the sutras. And for me, I found that works better, that I've been able to go more deeply into certain parts. And I've never really gone so deeply into the section on Samadhi, which he doesn't call Samadhi, he calls Kaivalya. His, the 4 chapters, of course, are the first one he calls Samadhi Pada, then the Sadhana Pada, then the Vibhuti, and then the Kaivalya. Kaivalya dealing with, he calls Kaivalya instead of moksha or samadhi. And I've never really studied this thoroughly yet. I mean, I've not really studied the idea of samadhi thoroughly. Swamiji also taught us about this. This is more of an intellectual side. It's interesting also, it's interesting to the intellect to think about these different levels of samadhi. Some of these ideas are very pleasing to the intellect. If you have an intellect that likes to think, study, contemplate ideas, certainly in our yogic literature there's a lot of that available. If you really enjoy that, there's so much beautiful intellectualism, especially in the Yoga Sutras, it's there. And in our Vedanta, we have this beautiful intellectualism also that really develops the mind, the buddhi, the higher mind. So these are some ideas now on our Dharana, Dhyana, and Samadhi. And I'd like to close off this evening with 2 ideas, small ideas. When I first came to the spiritual path, and I came probably, I suppose I would say I came through Zen Buddhism, but I've always, of course, been a seeker. I can't remember even a time in my life, even in childhood, when I wasn't asking questions and so many metaphysical questions, even as a small child, that I remember very well this idea that I had to find out why I was alive and what was the meaning of life. That was a very important thing for me, even as a very, very small child. So I've been a seeker from childhood. And in the beginning I sought through philosophy, through art, through the Western. I don't think in the beginning I also sought through religion, but my Catholic religion, but that only lasted up to about the age of 10, because after the age of 10, none of that stuff made much sense anymore. And so the questions I was asking could not be answered within the Catholic religion after that age. Then it was more philosophy, poets, literature, art, where I sought some of these answers. When I got to university, the spiritual search took on more of moving more into Zen Buddhism, which was, at least on the fringe, was starting to make its presence felt in the universities of America in the 1960s. And so I read some literature on that. Some of the enlightened philosophers like this Viktor Frankl, who was very heavy influence on me in university days, who wrote this, The Last and Final Freedom, and many other works. Also J. Krishnamurti. They were not so well known, but they were known in university circles. And these people had touched very high levels of thinking and feeling and living. But Zen Buddhism appealed to me quite a bit. And I was introduced to some koans, even in university days, that could be used as meditative devices. And some of these koans existed in a book called Zen Flesh, Zen Bones. Have any of you ever heard of that book? It's by Paul Reps. It's a very small little book. Zen Flesh, Zen Bones. It's actually a very good book. I don't have a copy of it, but it was a very important book for me. And in that book, he had many Zen stories, as well as he had about 100 koans that could be used for meditating or focusing the mind. Please remember that Zen has come from India. Zen Buddhism is a direct descendant of Hindu Buddhism. A South Indian monk, Buddhist monk, called the Bodhisattva, went to China. He was quite a wild guy, quite a crazy guy. And he made a very big impact in China. He did a lot of wild stuff. And in fact, he's credited with taking Buddhism to China in about the 5th century AD. And from his work sprung up this whole school of like an extreme type of Buddhism, this every moment awareness and mindfulness idea, which was carried to Japan, where it became Zen Buddhism. And I think it went to Japan in about the 12th or 13th century. It went there quite late. It became known as Zen. Now Zen, and this is not just my idea, this is pretty well accepted by scholars, that Zen is a progressive change of the Sanskrit word dhyan. When the idea of dhyan moved from India to China, and from China to Japan, the Sanskrit word dhyan became Zen. So Zen is actually dhyan. It's actually dhyan. And this, almost all scholars will agree with that in the movement of the Hindu-Buddhist yogic tradition from India to China, from China to Japan, that the word dhyan morphed into the word Zen. It's very interesting to see how words change. I'm going to give a small digression here because these are things to think about. You say, oh, how can Zen be dhyan? There are people like that, you know. That reminds me of my sister's husband who came and visited me in Spain. He was a typical all-American football player, and they were visiting me when I was living in Spain, and he wanted to go out to eat. We went to a Spanish restaurant, and he said, I'll have a hamburger. That was many years ago. And the waiter went, no comprehendo. And he says, I want a hamburger. And the waiter, you know, whatever it is in Spanish, no comprehendo. And then finally the waiter's brain lit up and he said, oh, hamburguesa. And my brother-in-law said, no, hamburger. No, it's a hamburger. It's not a hamburguesa, it's a hamburger. You know, we can't accept that words change, you know. And my girlfriend and I, when we were moving in when we were moving around in Europe, when I was on my sabbatical, we were hitchhiking, I have to tell you, because in those days you could hitchhike. And so we had hitched a ride from Frankfurt, I think, down to, we wanted to go to Munich. And we were trying to find Munich on the map. We just landed from the USA, police were with us. So we got into this car, and this guy didn't know any English or anything, we didn't know any German, so we said we want to go to Munich. And he just saw these two cute American girls, and he said, you know, like that, get in. And so we were in the car, and we were watching for signs, and we just couldn't find anything that said Munich. And, you know, and it was just terrible. We thought, my God, you know, it's supposed to be only, you know, about 100 kilometers. We must have gone at least 110 kilometers. And then suddenly, my girlfriend, I don't know if it was my girlfriend or I, and we said, my God, you know, we've been seeing all these signs that said München. München must be Munich. And we just passed it. But you know, this idea, no, Munich is Munich. It can't be München, you know. You know, this idea, we get this thing in our brain that this is the word. You know, but we did. We went past Munich because we were looking for Munich, and we saw signs that said München. So Zen can become, Dhyan can become Zen easily enough when you realize these things. The other example that I often think about is that if you go to Hyde Park in London, and Anand and I, when he was a baby, we used to go there a lot because I like to take him out to the parks. And he was younger than Anandraj at that time. And there was a road called Rotten Row in Hyde Park. Rotten Row. Rotten, R-O-T-T-E-N, R-O-W. Rotten means decayed. You know the English word rotten. Means decayed, dirty, all that. Oh, it's rotten. I won't eat that apple, it's rotten. Row meaning, you know, a road. So everybody, the name of it was Rotten Row. Then I was reading about it in the history of Hyde Park, and apparently the name of that road originally was Rue du Roi. Now, Rue in French, of course, means street, and Roi means king. And the original name of that road, that little road, it was a small little road, was Rue du Roi. Now, it had morphed into Rotten Row, and you know why? Because it had become a notorious road, because there were trees and everything all around, that these thieves used to hide in the trees along the road and pounce on the travelers and steal all their money and kill them and everything. So, you know how the English are. So instead of calling it, you know, the Rue du Roi, just slowly became Rotten Row, because that was a place where if you went on that place, you got all your money stolen and you got killed and attacked by all these criminals. So it changed from Rue du Roi to Rotten Row. And this was a historical fact. So I don't think it's so hard to believe that the word Zen has come from the Sanskrit Dhyan. When we see, we could talk about a million things where these words have changed like that. So the reason I brought that up, a few things along the way, was in that book, Zen Flesh, Zen Bones was the most beautiful, beautiful free-verse poem from Kashmir Shaoism. Now, Kashmiri Shaoism is a type of Tantra. It's a very beautiful Tantra which is dedicated to Lord Shiva. And there are many, many scriptures associated with this Kashmiri Shaoism. And this poem, according to Paul Rebs, that he had translated, or he had got it translated by someone, I don't know, is supposed to be from Kashmiri Shaoism. And even today, 40 years later, I can say that that poem contains the essence of Dharana-Dhyana-Samadhi. That it really puts in a nutshell the whole idea of Samyama yoga. And I was so attracted to that poem. And even today I haven't found anything that formulates in words better my own quest, my own personal quest. And I'll just recite that poem for you. because it's a very wonderful expression of Dharana-Dhyana-Samadhi. This is a dialogue between Parvati and Shiva. Shiva is teaching Parvati the sacred spiritual knowledge. And first Parvati asks Shiva the question, and this poem is a question that Parvati is addressing to Lord Shiva. Parvati says, O Shiva, what is thy reality? What is thy reality? What is this? Who centers the universal wheel? What constitutes seed? What is this form beyond form, pervading form? How may I enter it fully, beyond time and space, name and description? Let my doubts be cleared. Isn't that a beautiful question? It's a wonderful question. What is God's reality? Who centers this universal wheel? Who centers this Maya? Who's created this Maya? What is it? What is that? What constitutes seed? What is seed? What is that power that produces? What is seed? How can something grow out of a seed? And what is that form beyond form, pervading forms? What is that essence of everything? How may I enter into that fully, beyond time and space, name and description? Time limits us, space limits us, name limits us, a description limits it. How can we go into that? How can we enter into that? Now, Dharana-Dhyana-Samadhi is knocking, the door opens and we enter into it. It's a wonderful poem, and even today, after all these years, I really find it to be so beautiful. How can we enter fully? That's what our yogic life is all about, entering fully into that. There's a very beautiful saint in India, 15th century, 14th century, 15th century, a Muslim Hindu. Many of you have probably heard of him, called Kabir. He was illiterate in the sense he couldn't read and write, but he used to sing the most marvelous songs and chant and compose the most marvelous poetry. In fact, he's become very popular in modern times, almost a fad, Kabir. One of his beautiful statements is, the entry point is now. It's a wonderful idea. The entry point is now. Not tomorrow, not yesterday. The entry point is now. To enter into that mystic absorption, that cosmic consciousness, we have to enter that through now, the present moment. So our job is to bring ourselves to the present moment. And we can only enter the present moment when the mind stops. When the chitta-vritti is nirodha and the mind is stopped, then we exist in the now, and then we can enter. So we know what to do. Now we just have to do it. We have to do it every moment, every day, every week, every month, every year. We just have to keep doing it until finally we're there in the now, and that will be the entry point. That now, maybe tomorrow, maybe a year from now, maybe 10 lifetimes from now, it may be 100 lifetimes from now. That is the entry point into cosmic consciousness.